A Hollywood legend. A quiet Brentwood home. A December night that ended with two bodies, one son in handcuffs, and a family accusing itself. What really happened inside Rob Reiner's house before dawn, and why does the truth still refuse to settle? For decades, the Reiner name stood for warmth, creativity, and stability in an industry famous for the opposite. Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker, he was a storyteller obsessed with family, connection, and human truth. Alongside his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, he built a life that, from the outside, looked almost untouched by Hollywood's darker instincts. Their home in Brentwood was known as calm, orderly, and deeply private. But on a December night in 2025, that image fractured in a way no script could soften. This story matters because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Even families built on love, resources, and public admiration can collapse under pressures no one sees coming. It began quietly, almost deceptively normal. Rob and Michelle attended a Christmas party hosted by Conan O'Brien, surrounded by familiar faces and longtime friends. Laughter, music, seasonal rituals, everything looked intact. But witnesses later recalled a shift. A disagreement. Raised voices. Nick Reiner, Rob's son, standing out not because he was loud, but because something about his presence felt unsettled. Not explosive, just off. Guests exchanged glances. Someone reportedly said the mood tightened. This wasn't a public meltdown. It was something subtler, more unsettling, like tension leaking through carefully maintained composure. Rob didn't avoid it. According to people there, he confronted the moment directly, trying to calm his son, to shield the situation from becoming spectacle. Michelle stayed beside him, steady, protective, unified. When they left, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Two parents doing what parents often do, choosing privacy over performance. And that's the last time most people ever saw them alive. What makes this night crucial is not just what happened at the party, but what followed in silence. Behind the scenes, Rob had privately confided to a friend that he felt lost when it came to reaching Nick. Years of struggle, rehab attempts, emotional distance, and unresolved fear had accumulated. None of that was visible under the party lights. Yet it was all there, waiting. By the next morning, the story broke open. Romy Reiner, unable to reach her parents, went to the house. What she found would trigger an investigation that instantly transformed a private family tragedy into one of the most disturbing Hollywood cases in years. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't rumor. This was the collision of legacy, family, and law, and from this moment on, every detail would matter. And here raised the first unanswered question that refuses to go away. If something catastrophic was building for years, why did everything finally break that night? When authorities entered the Brentwood home, the silence was overwhelming. No forced entry, no broken doors, no overturned furniture. Everything was locked, intact, almost eerily calm. Rob and Michelle Reiner were found unconscious, and the house was immediately sealed. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't a random act. Whoever was involved didn't break in. They were already inside or welcomed in. Neighbors reported hearing nothing. No shouting, no alarms, no cries for help. In a neighborhood where even minor disturbances carry, the total absence of sound became one of the most disturbing elements of the case. One investigator later said the quiet felt too deliberate. That detail alone reshaped the entire direction of the investigation. Then came the contradictions. Nick Reiner publicly stated he wasn't at the house. He suggested Romy knew more than she was saying. Romy denied this completely, telling those close to her that Nick was trying to redirect blame. From that moment, the case stopped being only about evidence. It became about competing realities inside the same family. As detectives traced movements, a new timeline emerged. Nick left the Brentwood area around dawn. He checked into a Santa Monica hotel. Staff described him as calm, polite, unremarkable, no visible distress, no urgency. Later, security footage showed him at a gas station, moving through routine actions as if nothing had happened. That calmness unsettled investigators more than panic ever could. Then came the critical detail discovered in the hotel room, never fully disclosed publicly, but significant enough to place Nick at the center of the case. Shortly after, police located him near downtown Los Angeles. There was no chase, no resistance, Just a quiet arrest that mirrored the eerie stillness of the house itself. Hey Race, where the story tightens, nothing about this sequence looks accidental. Not the silence, not the movements, not the absence of chaos. Everything suggests control, and control implies intention, or at least awareness. But intention doesn't equal explanation, and that's the problem investigators faced. Because while the evidence began pointing in one direction, the emotional truth inside the family was still deeply fractured. The question wasn't just who was involved, but why everything unfolded so quietly. And if this was planned, or even anticipated, how long had the tension been building before anyone noticed? Phase where sympathy fades and facts take over. And it's also where this case becomes far more disturbing than most people initially realized. Investigators knew immediately they were dealing with something precise, something controlled. There were no security cameras inside the house, no digital footprint to reconstruct events, no eyewitnesses. That meant the truth had to be pulled from science alone, and science does not care about legacy, reputation, or family name. Forensic teams moved through the house inch by inch. Every surface photographed, every object cataloged, every trace logged. This was not a chaotic crime scene. It was orderly, almost intentionally so. That detail alone raised alarms. In cases of emotional outbursts or spontaneous violence, disorder is unavoidable. Furniture moves, objects fall, signs of panic linger in the environment. None of that was present here. The house didn't look like a place where something suddenly went wrong. It looked like a place where something had already been decided. Pathologists focused on biological timelines, body temperature shifts, cellular changes, internal markers that allow experts to estimate time of death even without witnesses. Their conclusion was chillingly consistent. Rob and Michelle Reiner likely died hours before they were discovered, not close to sunrise, not moments before Romy arrived, but deep into the quietest part of the night, when the neighborhood was fully asleep and the world outside the house was completely still. That window of time changed everything. Then came the injuries. Experts determined they were inflicted at very close range using a sharp object. This wasn't distant. This wasn't accidental. It required proximity, control, and sustained involvement. What stunned investigators most was the duration. Independent analysts reviewing the findings concluded that the incident did not unfold in seconds or minutes. It unfolded in stages. That meant decisions were made, actions were continued, and at no point did the process simply stop on its own. This is the moment where the narrative shifted from tragedy to legal gravity. Prosecutors reviewed the findings and made a move rarely taken lightly. Nick Reiner was formally indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each parent. Under California law, this charge is reserved for cases where intent, deliberation, and clarity of action are believed to exist. It is not a symbolic charge. It is a declaration that the state believes the act was purposeful. Even more significant was the special circumstance designation. 2 victims, 1 event. That classification elevates the case into the highest tier of criminal prosecution. Life without parole became a legal possibility. There would be no middle ground if convicted, no reduced sentence, no ambiguity. When Nick appeared in court for the first time, the room was silent in a way that felt almost unnatural. No cameras, no live broadcasts, just restrained observation. He wore a riot jacket, a visual detail that instantly unsettled everyone present. That jacket wasn't symbolic. It was procedural, used when authorities believe risk exists. The fact that it was deemed necessary spoke volumes without a single word being said. Nick's demeanor didn't match public expectations. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't frantic. He didn't break down. He stood still, composed, almost distant. When he entered his plea, it was direct, not guilty. He insisted he loved his parents. He claimed Romy knew the truth. That statement alone detonated the family dynamic in public view. Then came the moment that shifted media coverage overnight. Standing beside Nick was Alan Jackson, not a public defender, not a temporary legal representative, one of the most aggressive and experienced defense attorneys in California, known for taking on cases where the odds are brutal and the stakes absolute. His presence sent a clear message. This defense was not improvising. This was a long-term, high-level legal strategy built for years of courtroom warfare. Legal analysts immediately began asking the same question. How is this defense being funded? 2 first-degree murder charges with special circumstances guarantee astronomical legal costs. Independent forensic experts, private investigators, pretrial motions, appeals, strategy teams. The price of a defense like this easily climbs into the millions. Yet Nick Reiner had no recent projects, no visible income, no public contracts. The math didn't add up. Speculation exploded. Was family money involved? Trust funds? Estate assets? If so, was it legal? And more importantly, was it ethical? Inheritance law experts weighed in, explaining that while some assets can be used for legal defense, doing so can ignite secondary lawsuits between heirs. According to sources close to the family, Rob Reiner was deeply opposed to the idea that family resources might be used to defend the man accused of killing their parents. Nick's legal team responded quickly, insisting all funding was lawful and documented. No specifics were provided, no confirmation, no denial of family involvement, just a statement that everything was above board. That silence only intensified public division. Inside the courtroom, however, none of this was addressed. The judge didn't ask. Prosecutors didn't push. At this stage, funding wasn't legally relevant. But outside those walls, it became a second trial in the court of public opinion. And beneath all of it, the emotional war between siblings continued to deepen. Nick accused Romy of distorting facts. Romy maintained Nick was rewriting history. Prosecutors quietly refined their timeline. Every movement Nick made that night was now mapped. The hotel, the gas station, the hours that didn't align with his version of events. The case file grew heavier by the day. What made this phase so unsettling wasn't just the evidence. It was the realization that this wasn't a mystery unraveling, it was a collision. Science against denial, law against memory, siblings against each other. And no matter which version of events ultimately prevails, the family as it once existed was already gone. Because at this point, the case was no longer asking what happened. It was asking something far more difficult. How long had this outcome been building? And could anyone have stopped it? As the legal machinery moved forward and the courtroom became the central stage of the Reiner case, another narrative began to surface, one that didn't rely on forensic charts or legal statutes, but on memory, psychology, and years of unresolved emotional damage. This was the part of the story no indictment could fully capture, yet it hovered over every hearing like an unspoken presence. Because to understand why this tragedy mattered so deeply, investigators, analysts, and even the public were forced to look backward far beyond the Christmas party, far beyond the Brentwood house into a childhood and a family dynamic that had been quietly fracturing for decades. Nick Reiner had lived his entire life in the shadow of a man the world adored. Rob Reiner wasn't simply famous, he was revered. To audiences, he represented warmth, empathy, humor, and emotional intelligence. His films taught people how to love, how to forgive, how to connect. But inside that reality, Nick experienced something very different. In statements made years before the tragedy, Nick admitted that he loved his father but never felt emotionally close to him. Not neglected, not abused, just distant. A subtle but persistent gap that followed him from childhood into adulthood. That distinction matters. This wasn't a story of overt cruelty or clear villains. It was a story of emotional absence, of being physically present in a loving household while feeling fundamentally unseen. Nick once described it as living in the same room as love without ever fully touching it. Those words gained new weight once the case unfolded. Observers began to question how someone raised in such apparent privilege could still feel so profoundly disconnected. Friends of the family later said Rob truly tried. His schedule was demanding, his work relentless, but he believed in being present. He attended events. He showed up. He supported his children publicly and privately. Yet sometimes effort doesn't translate into connection. Sometimes emotional alignment simply never locks into place. And for Nick, that misalignment became foundational to how he saw himself. As adolescence gave way to adulthood, that sense of emotional isolation hardened into something more dangerous. Nick turned to substances early. What began as experimentation escalated quickly into dependency. By the age of 15, he entered rehab for the first time. This wasn't a hidden scandal. The family faced it openly. Rob and Michelle sought help immediately. Exhausting resources, most families don't have access to specialists, treatment centers, long-term care. They didn't walk away. They doubled down. But addiction is not a straight line. Recovery came in fragments, followed by devastating relapses. Each time Nick seemed to stabilize, hope returned. And each time he fell back, the emotional toll grew heavier. He moved constantly. Maine, New Jersey, Texas, always searching for something: structure, escape, belonging, but never finding permanence. Friends described him as kind, introspective, and deeply troubled. A man who carried shame quietly. Rob and Michelle never withdrew support. Not once. They answered late-night calls, paid for treatment again and again. Rob reportedly told friends that giving up on Nick was never an option. "If we stop trying," he once said, "he'll stop believing he can change." That belief shaped their entire approach. Love wasn't conditional, but love doesn't erase fear. In time, that fear became part of the household's emotional climate. Not fear of Nick as a person, but fear of unpredictability. Fear of relapse. Fear of losing him. Fear of the next phone call. According to people close to the family, the tension wasn't loud. It was quiet, persistent, always present. In 2015, Rob tried something different. Instead of separating his work from his son's recovery, he merged them. The film Being Charlie was born a raw, unfiltered portrayal of addiction inspired directly by Nick's experiences. For a brief moment, it worked. Nick showed up. He focused. He took responsibility. Crew members noticed a change. Rob seemed hopeful again. The project reconnected them creatively in a way therapy never had. But that stability didn't last. After the film wrapped, Nick relapsed. The cycle resumed. And with each repetition, the emotional margin grew thinner. Years passed. Rehab visits blurred together. Moments of clarity alternated with periods of withdrawal. By the time the Christmas party arrived, the family was exhausted, not from lack of love, but from the weight of carrying hope for so long. That argument wasn't sudden. It was accumulated. Years of concern, years of disappointment, years of fear finally colliding in one moment. According to sources, it wasn't about money or fame. It was about boundaries, about safety, about limits that had been tested too many times. After Rob and Michelle's deaths, the family broke their silence only once. Their statement was not legal. It wasn't defensive. It was human. They spoke of Rob and Michelle not as icons, but as parents who held the family together even when things were falling apart. They asked for privacy, and then they disappeared from public view. Privately, the fractures deepened. Reports surfaced that Nick attempted to contact his siblings from custody. Romy reportedly responded through legal channels, asking for distance. Not anger, distance. A boundary that had finally become necessary. A private memorial followed. No cameras, no speeches, just stories. Laughter through tears. Candles. Music. A farewell rooted in family, not celebrity. Tributes poured in from across Hollywood: actors, directors, writers, all speaking of Rob's generosity, his mentorship, his belief in people. Michelle was remembered as the quiet strength behind everything, the anchor. And yet, behind every tribute lingered the same unresolved question. How does a family that loved so deeply arrive here? As the case continues, the legal process will decide guilt or innocence, but it will never fully answer the emotional truth. That truth lives in years of silence, effort, disappointment, hope, and fear. It lives in a father who never stopped trying, a mother who never gave up, and a son who carried a wound he never learned how to heal. And that is what makes this story impossible to simplify. Because this isn't just a case about what happened that night. It's about everything that happened long before it. This case isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's about silence, what families don't say, what pain hides behind success, and what happens when love collides with limits. The Brentwood house remains sealed in memory, its quiet echoing louder than any headline. Prosecutors say the evidence is strong. Nick says he's innocent. Romy says the truth has been twisted. And somewhere between those claims sits a reality none of us fully see yet. Rob Reiner's legacy will endure. His story shaped how we understand connection. But this story, unfinished, unresolved, asks us to confront something far more uncomfortable. Can the truth survive when family loyalty fractures? And when the final verdict arrives, will it answer the question everyone keeps circling or leave us with even more silence? This story isn't over, and when the next chapter unfolds, we'll be watching closely. Subscribe for continued, in-depth coverage of the stories Hollywood can't explain.